Cops tore black woman's passport at airport. Didn't know she was married to state's top prosecutor. The excitement of stepping onto a plane, heading to a new city, or even just returning home from a long trip always filled her with a sense of freedom and curiosity. On that particular morning, she was dressed neatly in a light blue blouse and comfortable slacks, carrying a medium-sized leather suitcase and her favorite black handbag. She moved through the airport with confidence, though she was careful to follow all the rules. She had done this countless times before and believed she knew exactly what to expect. The airport was bustling with people. Travelers hurried past her, some dragging wheeled luggage, others juggling coffee cups and phone calls. Families with children laughed and called to one another, while business travelers moved quickly, focused on their flights. Monique navigated the crowd with ease, keeping her passport and boarding pass in hand. She approached the security checkpoint, smiling politely at the officers, and doing everything she had been instructed to do. She placed her handbag and suitcase on the conveyor belt and stepped through the scanner. The officer waved her forward, but then paused and looked at her with a questioning expression. "Ma'am, can you come over here, please?" he said. Monique's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea why she was being singled out. She complied immediately, keeping her hands visible and her voice calm. "Of course, officer. Is there a problem?" The officer motioned to another colleague, and together they examined her passport. "We need to check this carefully," one of them said. Monique watched as they scrutinized the document. The situation was confusing and increasingly stressful. She tried to stay calm, explaining politely, "This is my passport. I've traveled many times before and it's valid." But the officers seemed skeptical. They flipped through the pages, examined the stamps, and compared her photograph to her face. Monique tried to maintain her composure, but inside she felt a rising sense of frustration and humiliation. Other travelers started to notice the commotion, some slowing down to see what was happening. A few even stopped to watch silently, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. "Ma'am, we might have a problem here," one officer said finally. He spoke in a tone that sounded more like a warning than a question. Monique's stomach tightened. "Problem? What kind of problem?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "This passport is mine. I've traveled internationally before without issue." The officer didn't answer directly. Instead, he gestured to another officer who took the passport and inspected it more aggressively. Monique felt a wave of panic. She had never been treated like this before. Her mind raced. She had always obeyed the rules, had all the right documents, and yet here she was, being treated like a criminal. Then, in a moment she would never forget, one of the officers roughly handled the passport. In an instant, it was torn. Monique gasped and instinctively reached for it. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed. Her voice rose slightly, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. Travelers paused, some frowning, others taking out their phones to record the incident. The officer looked at her blankly. "It was invalid," he said curtly. Monique shook her head in disbelief. "Invalid? This is my passport. It's perfectly valid. You have to check again. Please, just look carefully." Her hands were shaking, and she felt a hot flush of anger mixed with embarrassment. People around began whispering, murmuring among themselves about what was happening. A young woman waiting in line muttered under her breath, "I can't believe they're treating her like that. She's just trying to travel." Another traveler, an older man, looked annoyed and muttered to himself about how the officers were being rude. Monique could hear some of this, and it gave her a small sense of solidarity, but it did little to calm her own nerves. The officers continued to question her, ignoring her explanations. Monique tried to stay composed, explaining clearly, "I have identification, my boarding pass, and my passport. I am fully compliant with your rules. I am not doing anything wrong. Please just let me explain calmly." She hoped that her polite tone would diffuse the situation, but the officers seemed uninterested in listening. As the minutes passed, Monique felt more and more isolated. She noticed other travelers glancing nervously at her, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. She could feel their eyes on her, some sympathetic, some judgmental. Her thoughts began to race. Why is this happening to me? What did I do wrong? She struggled to understand why she was being treated differently from the other passengers who were moving through the security line without incident. Finally, the officers asked her to step aside into a small holding area near the security checkpoint. Monique complied quietly, feeling a mixture of anxiety and indignation. She sat down on a cold metal bench, her heart pounding, and tried to calm herself. She knew she needed to stay composed if she wanted to resolve the situation quickly. She took deep breaths and tried to focus on the facts. While she waited, she noticed the reactions of the people around her. Some travelers whispered to each other, shaking their heads. A few recorded the incident on their phones. Monique felt a sense of helplessness. Here she was, just trying to travel, and yet she was being treated as if she were guilty of some serious offense. In a moment of frustration, she called her spouse, David Reynolds, who was a well-known state prosecutor. Her hands trembled as she explained what had happened. "David, they tore my passport. They say it's invalid. I don't understand. I've never had any trouble before." Her voice was a mixture of anger, fear, and disbelief. David, shocked, immediately began asking questions, trying to understand the situation. He told her to stay calm and that he would contact the airport authorities. Monique tried to stay composed, but it was difficult. The officers continued to hover nearby, occasionally giving her instructions in curt, clipped tones. She obeyed, but each command felt like an additional reminder of how powerless she was in that moment. As she waited, Monique thought about the countless times she had traveled without incident. She had always followed the rules, had all her documents in order, and yet here she was, treated with suspicion and hostility. She felt humiliated, not only by the officers' actions, but also by the public nature of the incident. People were watching, recording, and whispering, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being judged unfairly. The minutes felt like hours. Monique tried to distract herself by observing the airport around her. She noticed children laughing as they chased each other down the hallways, travelers rushing to catch flights, and airline staff moving efficiently to keep the lines flowing. Life continued around her, normal and oblivious, while she remained stuck in an experience that felt surreal and unjust. Eventually, one of the officers approached her again. Monique straightened in her seat, trying to project confidence despite her inner turmoil. "Ma'am," he said, "we need to verify some information. Please answer our questions honestly." Monique nodded, her voice steady. "I will. I just want to resolve this calmly and correctly." She provided all the details the officers requested, repeating her name, birth date, passport number, and flight information. She answered each question politely, clearly, and honestly. But the officers remained cautious, continuing to treat her with suspicion. Monique felt the unfairness of the situation keenly. She had done nothing wrong, yet she was being questioned as if she had. By this point, a small crowd had gathered nearby. Some travelers whispered about how inappropriate the officers' behavior seemed, while others looked on silently. Monique could feel the weight of their attention, both comforting and stressful. She tried not to let it distract her, focusing instead on staying composed and providing the information the officers demanded. Despite her calm demeanor, Monique could feel frustration and anger bubbling inside her. She thought about how she had always believed that following the rules and being honest would protect her from such experiences. Yet here she was, torn between fear and indignation, realizing that even her careful adherence to rules was not enough to prevent mistreatment. She thought of her family, of her husband, and of the life they had built together. She reminded herself to stay strong, to remain calm, and to trust that the truth would eventually be recognized. She knew that panic or anger would only make the situation worse. She took another deep breath, straightened her posture, and prepared to answer the officers' questions with patience and clarity. Monique realized that, even though this experience was humiliating and unfair, she could not let it define her. She would face the situation with dignity, protect herself, and ensure that her side of the story was heard. The officers might not understand, and the travelers might not intervene, but she could control her own actions and maintain her integrity. And so she sat on the cold metal bench, holding the torn remains of her passport carefully in her hands, determined to navigate this challenge with patience, clarity, and resilience. Though she felt a mix of fear, anger, and disbelief, she refused to let the incident strip her of her confidence or her sense of self-worth. Monique Carter sat on the cold bench, gripping the torn edges of her passport, her mind racing. The chaos of the airport around her seemed distant, almost unreal, but the humiliation she felt was sharp and immediate. She had always been careful to follow the rules, to present herself politely and professionally. Yet in that moment, she felt like she was being judged not for what she had done, but for something she could not control. Her hands trembled as she dialed her husband, David Reynolds. He was not just any husband. He was the state's top prosecutor, a man who dealt daily with complex legal matters and had authority and respect in the courtroom. She hoped that, by calling him, she could get some guidance and support. As the line rang, she felt a mixture of relief and worry. Relief because she was reaching out to someone she trusted completely, worry because she knew that her calling him might complicate things in ways she could not predict. "David, it's me," she said when he answered. Her voice was steady but carried a hint of fear. "They tore my passport. They're saying it's invalid, but it's not. I don't know what to do." David was instantly alert. "Calm down, Monique. Tell me exactly what happened," he said, his voice low but urgent. He listened carefully as she explained every detail. The moment the officers stopped her, how they examined her passport, how one of them tore it, and how the others refused to listen to her explanations. "I'm so embarrassed," Monique admitted quietly, looking around at the travelers who were still watching and whispering. "I don't understand why this is happening to me. I've followed every rule. I've done nothing wrong." David's mind worked quickly. He knew that this was more than a simple airport mistake. He understood that her experience reflected a combination of human error, miscommunication, and possibly deeper issues in the way security officials handled travelers. "Listen to me, Monique. Stay calm. Don't argue with them anymore. Just answer their questions politely if they ask anything. I'm going to contact the airport authorities immediately. We will get this sorted," he instructed. Monique tried to focus on his words. She knew he was right, but it was difficult to remain calm when she felt so exposed and vulnerable. She could feel the tension in the air, the way the officers' eyes kept returning to her, the whispers of travelers, the low hum of airport announcements, all blending into a sense of chaos that made her stomach twist. As she waited, she noticed a few people filming on their phones. Some of them gave her sympathetic looks, others seemed curious, almost as if they were witnessing a drama unfold in real time. Monique felt both grateful and self-conscious. She wished she could explain to everyone what had really happened, but she knew that might only inflame the situation further. Meanwhile, David called the airport's public relations office and the security administration. He explained the situation, emphasizing that Monique's passport was valid and that she was being treated unfairly. He requested an immediate review and asked that someone from higher management come to speak with her directly. While waiting, Monique's thoughts turned inward. She remembered the countless times she had traveled without incident. Each trip had been a demonstration of her responsibility, her careful planning, and her respect for rules. Yet here she was, being singled out, treated with suspicion, and humiliated in a public space. She thought about how strange it was that life could turn so unexpectedly, how ordinary moments could become extraordinary tests of patience and resilience. She also thought about her husband, David. While she knew he could intervene and make sure she was treated fairly, she did not want to rely solely on his authority. She wanted her dignity to remain intact. She reminded herself to be polite, to answer questions calmly, and to remain composed. She knew that every word, every gesture, mattered in a situation that could quickly escalate. After several minutes, a supervisor from the airport arrived. Monique immediately stood, straightening her back and presenting herself as calmly as she could. The supervisor introduced himself politely, asking her to explain the situation. Monique repeated the story clearly, carefully emphasizing the validity of her passport and the unnecessary tearing of it. She spoke slowly, deliberately, making sure each word conveyed her professionalism and her frustration without sounding angry. The supervisor listened attentively, occasionally nodding. He took notes and promised to investigate immediately. Monique felt a small sense of relief, though she knew the process might still take time. She could see the officers watching her from a short distance, their expressions unreadable. It was clear they were uncomfortable now that a higher authority was involved. While the supervisor spoke with the officers, Monique's phone buzzed. It was David. "I've contacted airport security and management. They are sending someone to meet you directly. Stay calm and don't argue with the officers. Let them do their job while management handles this," he instructed. Monique nodded, even though he could not see her. She felt reassured by his guidance. His calm voice reminded her that she was not alone, that someone she trusted completely was advocating on her behalf. Still, she felt the lingering sting of humiliation. Being treated as if she had done something wrong when she had done nothing at all was painful, especially in a space full of strangers who could watch but not intervene. As the situation unfolded, she noticed more travelers filming and whispering. Social media had become a powerful tool, and she realized that if someone posted what they saw online, the incident could spread quickly. She hoped the story would reflect the truth, that she had been compliant, respectful, and unfairly treated, but the thought of being exposed publicly without her side of the story made her nervous. Eventually, a senior airport manager arrived. He introduced himself politely, expressing regret for the situation. "Ma'am, we understand this has been upsetting. We want to make sure we address this properly," he said. Monique felt a small sense of hope. Finally, someone in authority was acknowledging her distress and taking steps to resolve the problem. She explained everything again, calmly and clearly. The manager asked questions, verified her documents, and promised to issue an apology for the mishandling of her passport. He also instructed that she be allowed to proceed with her travel as soon as possible. Monique felt a mixture of relief and lingering anger. Relief because the situation was finally being addressed, anger because she had endured such unnecessary stress and humiliation. While waiting for the final resolution, she reflected on the unfairness of the experience. She thought about how easy it was for misunderstandings to escalate when officials acted without full knowledge of the situation. She also considered the role of race and how it might have influenced the officer's behavior, though she did not want to dwell too much on assumptions. She focused instead on the facts: her compliance, the torn passport, the need for resolution. David called again, checking on her. "Are you okay?" he asked. Monique nodded, even though he could not see her. "I'm fine. They're listening now and management is involved. It's still frustrating, but I'm staying calm," she said. He reassured her again, reminding her that she had done nothing wrong and that he was proud of how she was handling the situation. His support gave her strength. She realized that even though she had been treated unfairly, she could maintain her dignity and composure, and she could rely on her knowledge and professionalism to navigate the ordeal. As the minutes passed, Monique noticed the officers becoming quieter and less confrontational. The presence of management seemed to have changed the dynamic. Travelers who had been watching began to move on, some still whispering but no longer recording. The immediate tension began to ease, though Monique knew she would remember the experience for a long time. Finally, after what felt like hours, the manager handed her a new passport and issued a formal apology. Monique accepted it politely, taking a deep breath and steadying herself. She thanked him, though inside she still felt a mixture of relief, lingering anger, and disbelief. She knew the ordeal was not just about a torn passport. It was about dignity, respect, and fairness. It was about how quickly ordinary moments could become tests of patience and resilience. And she knew that she had faced it with as much grace and composure as she could muster. When she finally walked toward her gate, passport in hand, she felt exhausted but stronger. The experience had been humiliating, but it had also reminded her of her inner strength and the importance of remaining composed in the face of injustice. She realized that, while she could not control the actions of others, she could control her responses, her dignity, and her courage. Monique took her seat on the plane, reflecting on everything that had happened. She knew the story would not end there. The airport authorities had promised a review, and her husband would ensure that her experience was documented and addressed. She felt a sense of empowerment, knowing that she had stood her ground, maintained her composure, and ensured that the truth would be known. And as the plane prepared for takeoff, Monique closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. She knew the ordeal was over, but she also knew that the memory would stay with her. Yet she felt a quiet pride in how she had handled it, a reassurance that even in moments of unfair treatment, dignity and courage could prevail. After the incident at the airport, the story of Monique Carter's torn passport began to spread in ways she had not anticipated. While she tried to focus on moving forward and getting back to her life, the reality was that the moment had already captured the attention of several travelers who had witnessed the events firsthand. Some had filmed the incident on their phones, capturing the confusion, her polite protests, and the moment her passport was torn. Within hours, short clips began appearing on social media platforms. The clips, though brief, painted a clear picture. A young black woman, calm yet clearly distressed, had been stopped by airport officers who treated her with suspicion, even tearing her passport in the process. The captions that accompanied the videos highlighted the outrage many viewers felt, calling the treatment unfair and demanding answers from airport authorities. Monique did not post any of the videos herself. She had no desire to escalate the situation publicly. Yet she could not ignore the fact that her experience had already become a public spectacle. David Reynolds, her husband, noticed the growing attention immediately. He understood the power of social media and how quickly stories could gain traction, for better or worse. He reached out to the airport administration and the state's Department of Aviation to ensure that the official narrative would be documented and that Monique's side of the story was clearly understood. He also prepared for possible questions from journalists, knowing that the story could escalate beyond the airport's walls. By the next morning, local news outlets had picked up the story. Headlines highlighted the shocking event: a passenger's passport torn by airport officers and the unexpected twist that she was married to the state's top prosecutor. The coverage struck a balance between the unusual circumstance of her personal connection and the larger issue of how travelers are treated at airport security. Monique read some of the reports with mixed feelings. On one hand, she appreciated that the story was being reported responsibly. On the other hand, she wished the attention had not been forced upon her so suddenly. As the media coverage spread, Monique's phone began to ring almost constantly. Friends, colleagues, and acquaintances reached out to check if she was okay. Messages poured in from people expressing sympathy, anger, and disbelief at the way she had been treated. She responded patiently, trying to reassure everyone that she was physically safe, though the emotional impact of the event was undeniable. She knew she had to remain calm, especially with the media taking an interest. Meanwhile, airport officials faced increasing scrutiny. The torn passport incident raised questions about training, protocols, and potential bias in handling travelers. Supervisors and managers were called in to review the situation and to explain the officers' actions. The public wanted answers, and the authorities realized that this was more than an isolated incident. It was a moment that could influence public trust in airport security procedures. Monique herself was invited to give a formal statement to the airport's internal review team. She recounted the incident calmly, noting the sequence of events, the treatment she had received, and her repeated attempts to clarify that her passport was valid. Her statement was detailed and professional, yet it carried the unmistakable emotion of someone who had felt powerless and humiliated in a public space. Her testimony had an impact. The officials realized the depth of the mistake and how unnecessary the confrontation had been. They noted the need for better training in handling situations where passengers are compliant, but the officers perceive a problem. Monique's clear, composed recounting of events made it difficult for anyone to dismiss her experience as trivial or exaggerated. As her story continued to unfold publicly, civil rights advocates began weighing in. They emphasized that the incident highlighted broader issues, including racial dynamics, assumptions made by authority figures, and the importance of fair treatment in all public spaces. Commentators argued that even a small mistake, when handled without care, could escalate into a deeply humiliating experience for individuals who had done nothing wrong. Social media became a platform for discussion. People shared similar experiences they or their loved ones had faced at airports, sparking debates about bias, accountability, and systemic reform. Monique, while uncomfortable with the attention, felt a quiet sense of responsibility. She had never intended to become a public figure, yet the situation presented an opportunity to shed light on issues that affected many travelers, especially those who might face prejudice without protection. David Reynolds played a key role during this period. He maintained contact with media outlets, ensuring that reports accurately represented the facts. He also consulted with legal experts and civil rights organizations, preparing to advocate for Monique in any formal inquiries or policy reviews. While he could not erase the emotional strain of what had happened, his support reassured Monique and helped her navigate the growing public scrutiny. The airport administration, under pressure, announced that the officers involved were placed on temporary administrative leave while the situation was investigated. Statements were issued promising a thorough review and steps to prevent similar incidents in the future. Monique received a formal apology, acknowledging the mishandling of her passport and the stress she endured. Though the apology could not undo the humiliation, it offered a sense of closure and official recognition of the wrongs she had experienced. During this time, Monique reflected on the unusual combination of personal and public factors in her story. Her marriage to the state's top prosecutor had brought additional attention, but she understood that the underlying issues were much larger than her individual case. She thought about how easily a normal travel experience could become a moment of fear, confusion, and public attention, especially when authority figures acted without fully assessing the situation. Her reflection also extended to her own reactions. She realized how carefully she had maintained composure despite intense stress, public observation, and emotional pain. She took pride in her ability to handle the situation with dignity and grace, knowing that losing control could have worsened the incident. At the same time, she acknowledged the lasting impact of the experience, recognizing that such moments could shape one's perception of safety, trust, and fairness. Monique also considered the broader societal implications. The story became a lens for discussions about racial equity, accountability, and respect in public spaces. It highlighted how easily misunderstandings could escalate when combined with implicit biases or insufficient training. Monique's personal experience became a symbol for larger conversations, even though she had never sought public attention or advocacy. As news coverage continued, Monique began receiving messages from others who had faced similar challenges. Some had experienced unnecessary scrutiny at airports, some had encountered dismissive officials in public offices, and others had dealt with systemic issues in their communities. Many expressed gratitude that her story was being told, believing that it could lead to awareness, dialogue, and meaningful change. Despite the growing attention, Monique remained focused on her daily life. She resumed work, managed her responsibilities at home, and maintained her routines as much as possible. Yet she could not ignore the emotional weight of the experience. Every time she thought about the torn passport, the officer's suspicion, and the whispers of travelers, she felt a pang of frustration and disbelief. Through it all, David Reynolds remained a steady presence. He continued to handle media inquiries, legal concerns, and communications with airport authorities. His calm and methodical approach allowed Monique to focus on herself and her recovery from the emotional strain. Together, they discussed ways to ensure that the incident would not happen again to others, emphasizing training, awareness, and accountability in public service. In the weeks following the incident, policy reviews were initiated. Airport security procedures were examined, and officers were reminded of the importance of careful judgment, fairness, and respectful treatment of all travelers. Training programs were updated to prevent similar misunderstandings, emphasizing communication skills, empathy, and cultural awareness. Monique's experience became a case study, used to teach officers how to handle sensitive situations appropriately. Meanwhile, public discourse continued. Social media posts, news reports, and commentaries explored the intersection of personal experience, authority, and public accountability. Monique's story became a catalyst for conversations about fairness, respect, and the responsibility of officials to treat every individual with dignity, regardless of race, status, or background. Monique herself reflected on how unusual it was to be thrust into a public conversation she had never sought. She had wanted nothing more than to travel safely, to live her life without incident, and yet she had become a symbol of resilience, fairness, and the importance of accountability. She accepted that this was now part of her story, understanding that her experience could contribute to a broader dialogue and inspire others to advocate for themselves and for systemic improvements. She also noticed a personal shift within herself. The incident, though traumatic, strengthened her sense of confidence and self-worth. She realized that even in the face of unfair treatment, she could maintain her dignity, voice her truth, and insist on accountability. The public attention, while overwhelming at times, reinforced the importance of standing firm and advocating for fairness, not just for herself, but for anyone who might face similar challenges in the future. As the weeks turned into months, Monique's story remained in public memory, though it gradually faded from immediate headlines. The airport and its officers implemented changes, guided by the lessons from her experience. Social media discussions, community forums, and public commentaries continued to reference the incident as an example of how even ordinary travel could reveal underlying systemic issues. Through it all, Monique remained grounded. She continued to travel, to engage with her professional and personal life, and to support causes that promoted fairness and accountability. She carried the memory of the incident with her, not as a source of shame or fear, but as a reminder of resilience, dignity, and the importance of speaking out when faced with injustice. Monique's journey through public scrutiny, media attention, and institutional review highlighted the complexities of life in the modern world, where personal experiences can quickly become public narratives. Yet she navigated this unusual terrain with strength, grace, and a commitment to fairness, leaving a lasting impression on those who followed her story and those who would learn from it in the future. By the end of this chapter of her life, Monique understood that her experience had changed her, not in ways that diminished her, but in ways that reinforced her sense of self, her understanding of public systems, and her commitment to advocating for fairness and dignity for all. After the whirlwind of media attention, public scrutiny, and airport investigations, Monique Carter finally began to feel a sense of closure. The official apology from the airport had been issued, and the officers involved were undergoing reviews and training to prevent future incidents. The public conversation around her experience had also prompted wider discussions about fairness, racial equity, and respectful treatment in public spaces. Yet for Monique, the process of healing and understanding what had happened was still unfolding on a personal level. In the weeks that followed, Monique found herself reflecting on the events more deeply. She thought about how quickly an ordinary day could turn into an extraordinary test of patience, dignity, and resilience. One moment, she had been excited to board a plane, looking forward to a new adventure. The next, she had been subjected to suspicion, confusion, and public observation that left her feeling exposed. She realized that this experience had shown her both the vulnerabilities and the strengths that existed within her. Monique also thought about the importance of having support during challenging times. Her husband, David Reynolds, had been a constant source of reassurance and guidance. From the moment she had called him at the airport, he had taken immediate action, contacting airport authorities, providing her with advice, and ensuring that her story was represented accurately in both official records and the media. Monique understood that having someone who believed in her, who could advocate for her without judgment, had made an enormous difference in her ability to remain composed and focused. She also recognized that her own response had mattered. By staying calm, polite, and factual during the incident, she had been able to maintain her dignity and ensure that her perspective was taken seriously. While she had felt fear and frustration in the moment, her careful attention to her own behavior had shaped the outcome in ways that she could control. This realization gave her a sense of empowerment she had not expected. Monique's reflections were not limited to personal growth. She also considered the broader lessons that could be drawn from her experience. The incident had highlighted systemic issues in airport security procedures, training gaps, and the ways in which assumptions or biases could influence behavior. She understood that the public discussion her story had generated could help prevent similar experiences for others. Her ordeal, while deeply personal, had become part of a larger conversation about fairness, respect, and accountability in public spaces. In addition to the systemic lessons, Monique reflected on the emotional impact of the event. She acknowledged that being publicly observed, judged, and questioned in a stressful situation had left her with lingering feelings of vulnerability. She realized that processing these emotions was an important part of recovery. She allowed herself to feel frustrated, angry, and embarrassed, but she also reminded herself to focus on resilience and the positive outcomes that had emerged. Over time, Monique noticed subtle changes in how she approached daily life. She became more mindful of her surroundings, more aware of potential challenges, and more deliberate in her interactions with officials or authority figures. These changes were not about fear or mistrust, but about preparedness and self-assurance. She had learned to anticipate situations where misunderstandings could arise and to respond with clarity, composure, and confidence. At the same time, Monique continued to receive messages from people who had been inspired or moved by her story. Travelers who had experienced similar mistreatment expressed gratitude that her experience had been recognized publicly. Civil rights advocates and educators reached out to discuss ways her story could be used as a teaching tool for fairness and accountability. Monique felt a quiet sense of purpose in knowing that her ordeal could have a positive impact beyond her personal life. Monique and David also took time to discuss how the experience had affected their family. They talked about the unusual combination of personal and public attention, the emotional toll of being observed and discussed by strangers, and the ways in which they could support one another through such moments. These conversations strengthened their bond, reinforcing trust, understanding, and the importance of mutual support in navigating life's challenges. As the airport and authorities implemented changes, Monique saw tangible results. Officers received additional training on respectful communication, empathy, and careful evaluation of documents. Internal protocols were adjusted to ensure that passengers were treated with dignity, even in cases of suspicion or misunderstanding. Policies were updated to prevent similar incidents in the future. Monique recognized that while these changes could not undo her personal experience, they represented meaningful progress and a commitment to fairness that could benefit countless travelers. Monique also found herself reflecting on the role of public attention. While the media spotlight had been intense and sometimes uncomfortable, she realized that it had been instrumental in driving accountability. The scrutiny had prompted the airport to act quickly, ensured that official apologies were issued, and highlighted the need for systemic improvements. She recognized that visibility, when combined with truth and professionalism, could be a powerful tool for justice and reform. In addition to systemic change, Monique considered her own emotional and mental growth. She had learned patience, resilience, and the ability to navigate high-pressure situations without losing her sense of self. She had experienced fear, humiliation, and uncertainty, but she had also demonstrated courage, composure, and clarity. These lessons would stay with her, influencing how she approached challenges in her personal, professional, and social life. Monique also took steps to ensure that she could reclaim a sense of normalcy. She resumed her travel routines, but with a newfound awareness and confidence. She interacted with airline and security staff politely, but assertively, always prepared to explain her situation calmly and clearly. She found that her confidence and composure often diffused potential issues before they could escalate. She also encouraged friends and family to maintain similar awareness, sharing lessons she had learned from her experience. Another important aspect of Monique's reflection was the power of community. She had received support from her husband, family, friends, colleagues, and even strangers who had witnessed or followed her story. This support reminded her that even in moments of public scrutiny and personal challenge, she was not alone. She understood that strength often came not just from individual resilience, but from the encouragement, guidance, and solidarity of others. Monique's experience also reinforced her belief in accountability. She recognized that institutions and individuals could make mistakes, but that acknowledgement, review, and corrective action were essential for restoring trust and fairness. She felt satisfaction knowing that her case had prompted meaningful review and change. While no apology could erase the embarrassment or stress she had endured, she appreciated that her voice had been heard and that her experience had driven positive action. As time went on, Monique found ways to use her story constructively. She shared her experience in discussions about fairness, civility, and systemic improvement, always emphasizing the importance of calm, clarity, and dignity. She also became a quiet advocate for better training and respectful treatment in public spaces, recognizing that even small contributions could create lasting impact. Her story was no longer just a personal narrative. It had become part of a broader dialogue about justice, respect, and accountability. Throughout this period, Monique also focused on self-care and emotional resilience. She reflected on her emotions, journaled her thoughts, and discussed her feelings with David. She understood that acknowledging her emotional response was essential for moving forward. She allowed herself to feel frustration, fear, and embarrassment without letting those emotions define her. Instead, she transformed them into awareness, strength, and constructive action. Monique also took time to reflect on the lessons learned about human behavior. She recognized that fear, misunderstanding, and assumptions could drive people to act unfairly, even without malicious intent. She realized that responding with patience, clarity, and calmness could influence outcomes positively, even in challenging or hostile situations. This understanding became a guide for how she approached conflicts or misunderstandings in her personal and professional life. In addition to practical lessons, Monique experienced profound personal growth. She realized that moments of adversity, while uncomfortable and sometimes humiliating, could reveal hidden strengths. She saw that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act with dignity and integrity despite fear. She learned that resilience could be cultivated, that composure could be maintained, and that personal values could guide responses even in difficult circumstances. Monique also reflected on the role of perspective. While the torn passport had been the catalyst for public attention and institutional review, the deeper lessons extended far beyond a single document or a single moment. She recognized the interconnectedness of personal experience, public accountability, and systemic reform. Her story illustrated how ordinary individuals could influence broader change simply by standing firm, speaking truthfully, and maintaining composure. As the months passed, Monique felt a renewed sense of purpose. She continued to travel, engage with her work, and participate in public discussions about fairness and respect. Yet she did so with a heightened awareness of her own resilience and the importance of advocacy. She recognized that while life could present unexpected challenges, each challenge was also an opportunity for growth, reflection, and positive action. Ultimately, Monique's experience became a defining moment in her life, not because it had humiliated her or caused public attention, but because it had taught her about resilience, dignity, and the power of truth. She had faced fear, public scrutiny, and systemic challenges, yet she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. She understood that the incident would always be part of her story, but it did not define her. Rather, it had revealed her strength, her composure, and her commitment to fairness. By embracing the lessons of her experience, Monique turned what could have been a moment of lasting shame into an enduring story of empowerment. She recognized that life was unpredictable, that people sometimes acted unfairly, and that systems could fail. But she also knew that by maintaining composure, seeking support, advocating for fairness, and reflecting on lessons learned, she could navigate even the most challenging circumstances with strength and dignity. And so, Monique Carter moved forward with her life, carrying with her the knowledge that resilience, integrity, and courage could transform adversity into opportunity. She understood that her voice, her composure, and her actions had mattered, not only for herself, but also for others who might face similar challenges. Her experience had ended with an apology, systemic review, and public recognition. But more importantly, it had left her stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever challenges life might bring with confidence and grace.